This episode of the Cole Memo is brought to you by the folks at riverbluffcollective.com. This month, August of 2024, they're running a special on their Bluff Pops. You can get those for 40% off. Many of you may know that the Bluff Punch Pop is one of my favorite products ever to come from the plant. It packs a whopping 50 milligrams per can. If that's too high of a dose for you, you can also get a 10 milligram per can. Once again, the Bluff Pops are 40% off for the month of August 2024. If 10 or 50 milligrams is still too high, they also sell lower dosed drinks and other edibles at riverbluffcollective.com. I'm displaying my screen right now. You can see there are other specials being run right now. They're running deals all the time. Once again, folks, this episode of the Cole Memo is brought to you by the folks at riverbluffcollective.com. Enjoy the episode and enjoy their products responsibly. You must be 21 years of age or older to purchase. Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into the Cole Memo. I'm sitting back down with my friend Phillip. How's it going, Phillip?
Going well. How are
Going
you?
well. Doing good, man. Doing good. Just about to roll up some weed. Gonna crack open a River Bluff Punch Pop, who is
Oh,
the first sponsor of the Cole Memo. So, uh, super tasty, super cool, and you can order them at riverbluffcollective.com. So there's the plug. What you smoking on, dude?
some white truffle mixed with some punch cake.
Mm, that sounds good. That sounds good. And I'm assuming that weed is from Illinois.
It's from Michigan.
Hell yeah. I am smoking on some Jack 47 right now, from
I'm going
Symponia
to
Farms.
I'm going to see family this coming weekend. So this is like I always keep a little log of the harvest dates of the stuff I have in the house. So this is the oldest weed I have right now. So I'm not excited to really smoke it anymore. I just need to get it out of the
Get it out.
house.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, thank you again for sitting down with me today. We're going to be sitting down and watching a speech that Illinois Governor JB Pritzker gave at the International Cannabis Bar Association. It looks like they had the Cannabis Law Institute there.
Well, it's I think it's like a school named after his family too.
Yeah, true. Northwestern Pritzker School of Law. I'm seeing that now. So, yeah,
Probably
with
a probably a sign society might be in trouble if your governors are showing up with a school named after their super wealthy family that they're the heir of.
that's
You
hilarious.
might be living in a gilded age if that's happening.
Yeah, yeah. Let me try to get this into full screen, and that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna watch this speech, and Phil, as we go through this, let me know if you want to pause it, and because the point of this is that I feel like in the media right now, I'm curious to see what you think about this. There's some good cannabis coverage, no doubt. Like the Club Chicago just posted a really good article on the hemp cafe. What is it called? The
Prohibition THC
Prohibition
Cafe.
THC Cafe. Yeah. I'm glad, there's still, definitely some good coverage out there. I think Southside Weekly has had some good coverage on like the
I mean, you
GTI stuff.
pretty much these days you see super local people will report, or if a dispensary is opening in a certain neighborhood, there might be a story in the Tribune. There isn't very much about yeah, I mean, there's not really much else happening, I guess, right?
Yeah, and I mean my biggest thing is I don't see anybody like, watching like the footage we're about to watch and then kind of giving pointed feedback or commentary on what is actually going on. Usually it just seems like, especially the traditional media, just kind of lauds the same talking points as Illinois. Like, yes, this is the most equity centric
Oh
law.
yeah, yeah. Like if you see a bigger story kind of about the whole state's progress, it'll be like Illinois celebrates opening its 100 and so social equity dispensary. But
Hmm.
there's no context to whether or not that's good or bad, or they might not include the part where it's well, 90% plus of the money is still flowing to the other shops.
Right. Right. So yeah, that's what, I try to hope I hope to provide balance and That's what I think we'll do today. Again, Phil, as we go through, just speak up. I'll pause it and
I would
yeah.
just say, I just want to say before we start this, I actually like, generally speaking, like the governor. Like, I think he's been fine. Like, he's the best you can ask for an Illinois governor in some regards.
Yeah.
But God, when he talks about cannabis, man, he's so annoying. like
What do you mean by that?
it just, it just doesn't, like, it's not reality. Like the stuff he talks about, like, I mean, I get it. You want to sell what you've done as like a success, but it's like what you're saying doesn't match what's happening.
Yeah. And will we see, I haven't watched this whole thing, but will we see some of that today in this speech?
Yeah, 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 of course, because he's
Cool.
talking about cannabis and social equity in Illinois.
Right. Right. All right. Well, let's get into it.
But
Let's
I just wanted to say I generally do like the guy, but I'm gonna come across like I hate him because every 5 seconds I'm gonna be like, "Oh, stop! That's bullshit."
Yeah, and I guess I should say that too. Like I voted for him and I actually voted for him on the guise of legalization. I didn't read the fine print on it. I mean, I maybe would have still taken the incremental step, just because I was
I
young.
did vote for the other guy in the primary. I will say that.
You voted for Rauner in the primary?
No, no, no. Dan Biss was the
Oh,
guy that ran against him.
gotcha.
I
I
think
don't
he was
remember.
like I think he was the state treasurer, maybe.
Okay.
I used to do like some photojournalism, so I had met Dan Biss, like in he like used to represent part of Evanston, I think.
Okay.
So I was like, oh, this is a guy I met. He seems down to earth, especially against like the billionaire with the name Pritzker. It just like you can have a normal guy or you can have this like crazy rich guy.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, I think it was important to lead with that. Generally speaking, I agree with Governor Pritzker. I would say on most policies. There are a few that I do specifically disagree with him on, and cannabis, candidly, is one of them. So, um, let's get into it, shall we? I think the other thing I always say is that this show would probably not be, you would not be hearing me right now if it weren't for the progress Governor Pritzker made with regard to cannabis legalization. As much as I talk about the shortcomings, it did make me comfortable enough to start this show. Credit where credit is due.
Thank you all very much. I so appreciate that. I have to admit, coming into this room, having been a student at this law school, coming into this room gives me the jitters. In fact, walking into the building reminds me of all the challenges of being a student at this institution. But it is a great institution, and thank you all for coming here for this great event. Thank you, David, for that introduction and invitation. And of course to Northwestern for hosting this conference. When I first took office as governor, I was intent on working with the General Assembly to pass a first in the nation equity-centric law, making Illinois the national standard for cannabis legalization and regulation. There had been states before us that had done it, but all had done it by referendum. And I knew that it would require us to disentangle not just the convoluted and
Maybe we pause it for just a second, Phil, and you actually taught me a little bit about this. Like maybe we would have done it by referendum in Illinois if we could, but we can't, right?
Oh, right. Yeah, we're one of the states that doesn't have like ballot initiatives,
Yeah. So
which
just
is
to,
which is I don't know. I think this is right, but it was like a movement that like came about in the 70s. Like a lot of states were making that reform in the 70s to like give people this ability to have like people powered legislation. And I think Mike Madigan was pretty involved with like defeating that type of thing happening here in Illinois.
Interesting. I'll have to look into that.
You
And
might want to fact check that though.
yeah, folks, definitely look into that. Maybe I'll try to Google it on a side window here while we continue the video. Um, yeah, I'll try to look into that. So here we go, continuing the video.
And I knew that it would require us to disentangle not just the convoluted and ineffective laws that were on our books at the time, but the lingering biases and misconceptions that put those laws on our books in the first place. So that was no simple task, as you can imagine, because when you do it in other states by referenda, then the legislature gets to work and decides, and the executive branch decides what the regulations are, and they have to do it quickly because, of course, the public is demanding, they just voted for it. They want this in place as soon as possible. Well, here in Illinois, we were guided by a simple goal, which is a safe, equitable, and prosperous cannabis industry, because for all the challenges that cannabis legalization required us to face, it presented even more opportunity. And it was opportunity to rectify the failures of our past while also building something better for our future. During my first 4 months in office, I worked closely with the General Assembly, with legal experts, and community advocates to do just that, to draft and enact the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. This landmark new law was carefully crafted to accomplish a model of what common sense, equity-forward cannabis policy can look like. And again, we had seen the other states and the direction they had gone, and they had failed to, in my view, get it right, and they were kind of trying to play catch-up afterward. And so we wanted to start from the very beginning, trying to get it right from the very beginning. As you know, in government, sometimes you start out with good intentions, and there are challenges that you face, but always if you kind of press, sempre avanti, ever forward toward the goal, we'll get there. So we started with the necessary first step of repairing the harms created.
Stop it for a second.
By the previous.
Sorry, I was on mute. So he was saying there that like the reason they wanted to do this social equity forward CRTA was because they'd seen the failures in other states. But I feel like that's not really true. Because when they talked about it here, well, first of all, a lot of the social equity stuff that they ended up including and the limited home grow we got, didn't that come from Carol Amon's bill?
I think it's
like it was like people put out that Amon's bill before this CRTA so that it like set the stage to be like, this is what we should be talking about.
Right. From what I've heard, that Ammons bill was introduced first to like set the stage, and a lot of the things that ended up going into the CRTA was inspired by it.
Yeah, because the CRTA was going to be even more of a giveaway.
Right.
To existing operators. And so here in Illinois, like you didn't need the other states. Like it wasn't because of other states that we adopted these things to diversify the industry. It was because Illinois had set it up so only rich white people could operate in this industry.
Right.
So it's like that, because think about like what were the rec states before us?
Colorado,
Washington.
I mean, were there many more than that? I mean, we're apparently the 11th state to do adult use, right?
I mean, I know Massachusetts.
Yeah. Anyways, though, to your point,
I mean, Michigan right around the same time, but like,
yeah, Michigan
if you're going to use states like Colorado and Washington as an example, it's like, I mean, what percent of those states is actually diverse? Like, I feel like there's a lot of white people in all those states.
Right.
So yeah, but it's just like the medical industry here was dominated by wealthy white men because that's how the state set it up. So the idea that we were ever going to get the legislature to fix like they did that, it should have been taken out of their hands to remedy that situation. Okay, anyway, we can continue.
No, it's all good. I appreciate you making that point. And like one thing that we sort of that I just want to go back for a second. We're at 3:30. There's just like You know, I know that he'll make this point again later. I'm pretty sure he made this point again later because I've not seen this full thing, but I remember like about 7 minutes in, he kind of makes a similar point. But I don't want to gloss over this. So again, we're at 3:30, but I'm just going to kind of bump us back to 132 for just a moment. So
And I knew that it would require us to disentangle not just the convoluted and ineffective laws that were on our books at the time, but the lingering bias.
So the idea that
Right.
we did disentangle the convoluted and ineffective laws that were on the books at the time is just laughable. And you made this point.
They literally didn't touch the Cannabis Control Act. The Cannabis Control Act
Right.
is the same as it existed since the 70s.
Right. And those are the convoluted and ineffective laws that were on the books at the time.
Well,
You
and
know?
then he mentions like disparities in enforcement, and it's like, well, yeah, and that still exists because a lot of cannabis shit is still illegal.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, cool. We will continue. And yeah, when he gets to that, I'll have a clip from the University of Illinois as a fact check. So
By the previous legal regime. And that meant clearing cannabis-related records of nonviolent, low-level offenders and doing that with automatic expungement and with gubernatorial pardons and individual court actions. I remember a meeting specifically with a bipartisan group of legislators. There weren't that many that on the other side of the aisle.
Wait, pause it for a second. That the more stoned I get during this, that guy that's like peering in and out of the doorway behind him, I feel like is going to give me weird vibes.
I didn't even notice that. I'm gonna keep my eyes on that. That's funny. That is funny. Keep your eyes on him, people.
There were some that were real advocates for getting, an equity-centric piece of cannabis legalization legislation passed. But I remember sitting with a group of them who were, really well-intended. And when we got to this subject of expungement and, and trying to right the wrongs of the past, and I said, well, why don't we do, something in legislation that would just do a broad automatic expungement? And the response from across the table was, oh, no, we don't want to be responsible for that. We want you to take all the heat for that. And so there was some conversation about that, but in the end, it was, I basically said, okay, well, I'll be the person who's issuing pardons and who's, putting expungement forward and making sure that we're doing it in the agency processes.
And I'll just say that for the first 2 years, and I can actually play something to back this up, but for the first 2 years of legalization, you could not get your record expunged for cannabis-related offenses unless you could pass a cannabis drug test.
Well, and none of them were automatic, right?
Correct. I'll have to find, there's a good video on that I actually just recently found.
Like, not only were not like none of them were automatic. You had to go to the state and say, I want my record expunged. But then also, if it was over a certain amount, like, wasn't it if it was over 500 grams?
Yeah, I've actually got
You
luckily,
was it that you weren't eligible at all, or was there like a lower level where you had to like get more permission? You had to like petition the court or something.
yeah, there was like a different process for like levels.
So he makes it sound like he just gave automatic expungements to a ton of people, but those people who actually qualified had to apply, like petition the state to get it. Then that next step up under 500 grams, you had to like go through an extra step to like the courts or something, right? And then
Yeah.
over 500 grams, you just weren't eligible for it.
Yeah, I believe so. And I've actually got, since it's short, I've got a quick 2-minute report that we can watch on the subject. Let's play it. It's called Automatic Expungement in Illinois, a Complicated Matter. I think this might answer some of our questions here, and then we can continue the clip.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars of marijuana, or rather hundreds of thousands of marijuana convictions could be expunged under Illinois' new state law. But CBS 2's Vince Girasoli found out it's not quite that simple or fast.
How many minor marijuana violations could be cleared away almost automatically? The number is large, an estimated 700,000 statewide. But this is important. Automatic is not when the law kicks in. It's when a case is identified and processed. And both the state and Cook County are going about that differently. Each start with the Illinois State Police, with officers reviewing databases for eligible cases individually. To date, the tedious process totals only 116,000. In the end, state police and local law enforcement will be responsible for dedicating personnel to wiping away the records. Your automatic expungement doesn't have to be approved until January of 2021 if it dates as far back as 2013.
A low-level marijuana conviction does not mean that someone is a threat to public safety.
In August, State's Attorney Kim Foxx outlined Cook County's process, starting again with state police. But the nonprofit Code for America is using volunteers and special software to help more quickly identify cases. Following a judge's approval, local law enforcement or the state police must actually clear the record.
We've had to do it on a case-by-case basis.
And that was labor-intensive and came at a price, says Ashley Kilroy, Executive Director of Denver's Office of Marijuana Policy.
We've had to, incur additional cost.
Unlike Illinois, Colorado's 2014 legalization didn't provide automatic expungement. She warns Illinois will still need to budget for locating those with expunged records.
You need to make sure you notify the individual to let them know that this conviction has been vacated.
Cases of marijuana possession of less than 30 grams qualify for automatic expungement as long as they aren't associated with violent crimes. But several police sources told us today the manpower needed to follow through with reviewing records will be a challenge. In the newsroom, Vince Girasoli.
So that didn't actually answer totally your question, because we were talking about tiers and if it's a different process, if it's more than, 500 grams or whatever. But I might be able to Google that as we continue this video. But I wanted to make that quick point that, some people were denied the expungement because they took a drug test and they're like, they weren't even thinking about it because cannabis is legal now. It's like, yeah, I'll take a drug test. I'll probably fail for THC, but that's legal.
I was going to say, so for possessing or dealing 30 grams or less before June of 2019, you were eligible for expungement.
Gotcha.
Okay, I can't read through this whole thing, I guess, but
well, people, take what we're talking about and run with it, look into it deeper, especially if it affects you. Because it can be complicated from what I understand. And maybe somebody I can ask about it in the future is the folks from Canna Equity, Illinois, because they help people through the expungement process. And actually, the only reason I have a concept of the fact that there is like this stages to it is because somebody asked a question about that in one of their
it says here, if your conviction was for possession of 500 grams or less or dealing less than 30 grams, you can still have your record expunged. So that implies if it was over 500 grams, you can't have your record expunged.
Yeah, sounds about right, which is fucked up.
So I think what I originally said was like kind of right.
Yeah, I think so. I think you were right on target. Well, cool. Let's keep this JB train rolling.
Of state government as opposed to writing it right into the law. We started, by focusing on how to right those wrongs, and that meant going after the 800,000 arrest records and convictions, and that's, by the way, what we did. In total, we cleared over 800,000 arrest records and convictions. And that, as you know, opened the doors for hundreds of thousands of Illinoisans to erase records that had held many of them back from getting jobs and obtaining housing. You hear a lot about, ban the box. You've heard that over the years. This was one of those things where, if you had to admit to on a form that you'd been arrested or convicted of anything, right? And this would be a low-level conviction. Or arrest, that it really did affect people's lives in a terribly negative way. And so this was one way to make sure that you're giving people a real opportunity to succeed in life. But it wasn't just enough to clear people's records. The war on cannabis had done tremendous untold damage to families and to neighborhoods across the state, particularly in communities of color.
All right, I wanted to pause it there.
We didn't end the war on cannabis.
Yeah, and
he talks about it like in the past tense.
Right. Why don't we just play a clip from the University of Illinois to prove that point? They did some research. They were actually contracted by the state of Illinois to do this research. Here's what they found. Whoops. Volume's not playing.
I think we're parked, man.
The fact that arrests are still happening, that does point to the fact, and you looked at this as well, the illicit market remains strong. And a lot of people, different depending on the demographic, but a lot of people are still turning to that illegal market to obtain their cannabis, right?
That's correct. The Tribune did a nice story a couple years back. Their angle on this was that the arrests in Chicago were occurring in places where there weren't dispensaries. So we took another look at that again. We updated that information and found that that's still the case. And that suggests that one reason that people turn to the illegal market is that it's just more convenient for them. They don't have a dispensary near where they live. And unfortunately, at least that's true in Chicago, the lack of dispensaries happens to be in neighborhoods that are primarily ethnic minorities and poorer neighborhoods.
So the arrests continue in areas that were always disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, according to research not only by the Chicago Tribune, but by the University of Illinois in follow-up. So, and that was also a sneak peek at my upcoming mini documentary, which is available now at colememo.com/minidoc, or you can catch a public screening coming soon near you. Let's watch the rest of it, unless you had any other thoughts on that, Phil.
Just the guy looming in back is still there.
He is still, yeah. I can't help but wonder if that's like security or just like a guy that really, he's like a fan, but that's the best spot he could get. You know, I don't know.
I would imagine he's security.
Yeah, interesting. Well, here we go.
So we created a fund that was focused on restorative justice called Restore, Reinvest, and Renew. We call it R3, that takes revenue generated from the cannabis industry and it puts it back into communities that were most harmed. Cannabis sales in Illinois today
Wait, stop.
Have provided.
The R3 money does not come from the cannabis industry. It comes from cannabis consumers.
Correct.
It'd be one thing if they were like, oh, all you companies that are profiting a bunch, we're going to take money from you to reinvest in these communities. No, you are taxing people who used to be, I mean, for the most part, a lot of them used to be victims of the war on drugs you're claiming to have ended.
Right.
Now you are taxing them more to make up for the harms.
You're making them foot the bill.
I can't, like, I don't hate, I mean, I do hate taxes. I'm self-employed. How can I not hate taxes? But like, just whenever they talk about the R3 program as being some great success, I'm like, fuck that. That money comes from us.
Right.
Like, we shouldn't have to pay for the state's persecution of cannabis users for decades.
Right. Right. And then they'll take money from the medical cannabis fund to fund the businesses as well. It's like, so the only place you can get the money is from victims of the war on drugs or literally medical cannabis patients.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, those are the easiest places to take it from, obviously.
Right. Crazy, man. Crazy. Well, thank you for making that point. Because it's important.
Whenever someone talks about the R3, I'm just triggered.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Hundreds of millions of dollars already for community organizations who are doing the work of rebuilding communities that were torn apart by the ill-conceived war on drugs, with grants to civil legal aid organizations, to economic development organizations, a re-entry from the criminal justice system, addressing those challenges, violence prevention, which is so badly needed and had been severely defunded before I became governor, and youth development, just broadly making sure we're providing jobs and opportunity for kids who might otherwise not get it. Yeah. And although I don't want to go through every piece of this,
If anybody else is hearing like a pounding, by the way, it's him hitting his hands on the podium. I was like, is there like somebody playing like bass next door or something? It's the bass is him pounding his hands every once in a while.
legislation, which was, crafted finally by a lot of great people, because it would take me too long, but I'll just say the final really big plank of the cannabis plan was something particularly novel that I believe will help define the legacy of this law and set a national standard for the cannabis industry, and that's the Cannabis Social Equity Program. We knew that, like in other states that had legalized before us, that we were setting up a multi-billion-dollar industry. I mean, that never existed before. And unlike in other states, though, we wanted to make sure those who had been historically disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs substantially benefited from the wealth that would be created by this new cannabis industry. That is something that did not happen again, because of the speed with which many other states had to move. I think there was intent by many of those folks to try to make that happen, but they just couldn't finally craft the legislation in the way that I think we had. And I want to remind you and give credit where credit is due. There were some legislators in our General Assembly here who had been working on this for a few years before I ever got to be governor of the state. They didn't have a governor who would work with them on it. And so when I got there, there was already a movement and some real experts in the General Assembly. And I, in some ways, was the beneficiary of their great work. And then, we had to, take it over the finish line once I took office. But, the Cannabis Social Equity Program provides licenses, it provides low-interest loans, it provides training programs and other resources to cannabis entrepreneurs who might not have otherwise had a chance at success. They may not have ever started a business before. They may not have been, certainly not in this industry.
Wait, pause. Just so much that he's talking about, I'm like, it just first of all, why would you ever promise someone generational wealth where they have to start and run a business if they've never started or run a business before? Sorry, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, right. Thank you, though. I mean, yeah, no, it's a
Just
brilliant point.
But I mean, I've heard other people talk about it. It's just this whole premise of we're going to get people licenses, and then you're going to have generational wealth from these licenses. Like, it's just a false promise.
Yeah.
You had no way to guarantee that. Not if it's based off the idea that like these people are going to have to operate businesses that are like going to be competitive and successful.
Right.
Like, you could have told people, hey, we'll get you a license and we'll get you started up and it'll be your chance at generational wealth. But I feel like they like pitched it so much as like a guarantee almost. And then, the overall thing about how these slots were just so limited from the beginning.
Right.
How many victims of the war on drugs did you just say? 800,000? How many social equity? How many social equity licenses are open? Maybe a couple dozen.
Mm-hmm.
It's just insane. Like, if anything, you should have just let the industry run wild, no restrictions or anything at all, and then just taken a bunch of that tax money and sent it as cash checks to people who had cannabis convictions in Illinois. How about that?
Right. Or I like this point that was made on High at 9. He calls it a social equity program. I could be wrong, but I think
doesn't that sound like it's almost something for like people with special needs?
Yeah.
Like it sounds insulting, just the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're talking to like people who are going to be entrepreneurs, like, sure, you're trying to give them opportunity and give them a leg up, but cannabis social equity program, like.
And I would just argue that it's not even really a program. Like, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they like make sure not to call it that in the disparity study. I could be wrong. People search the disparity study. We've posted it on my website, but these were social equity licenses. And it's funny, like, to call it a social equity program would be incorrect. And, you know, like here, this clip I'm about to play from High at 9, I think would be the closest thing to a social equity program.
Well,
And it
I think when he
also,
says program, he might also be talking about just the like legs of the stool or table, like licenses, funding, training, like that kind of thing.
right. But yeah, I think this point I'm about to play from High at 9 both addresses the point that you brought up, but also like the idea of what I think if you're going to have a social equity program, what it would look like. So here we go.
Social equity is not a guarantor of success. What social equity is, it's the opportunity to fail like everyone else and not to be kept out of a business opportunity because of socioeconomic or criminal history, et cetera, et cetera. It's a chance to stand up and fail just like everyone else. Or they would say, hey, social equity applicant, here's your store. We've already built it. Here's the money to run it. Have a great fucking day.
This though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I would use like the business I'm in, pet care. Like it's socially equitable because there is no licensing for the most part. You pretty much just have to get insured and then conduct yourself in a good enough manner that people are going to refer you to other people. Like, you know, it's like delivery of your good business practices. Like, so like literally, if you made no licensing required at all, that would probably be the most socially equitable way to approach cannabis licensing.
Yeah. I have one other definition that I'd like to play of social equity. We'll play.
Yeah, it's funny at the end she said like, otherwise you'd like build these people's stores out, hand them a bunch of money and go, here you go. It's like, well, that is actually what I think New York tried to do, right?
Yeah.
They were like, we'll contract with these people and like build out the actual stores. Like you won't have to even do that.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the thing. I feel like if you're gonna like try to say it would look something like that if you're gonna call it a program, you know, because otherwise it's like. But I think yeah. So here I think is what the definition of social equity is, and you're gonna love this, Phil. This is from one of our favorites. Here we go.
Representative Ammons, what would a truly equitable cannabis program look like to you?
I think we would start by fulfilling the promise that was made when you passed legalization in the first place. I think a truly equitable program has to remove all criminal penalties in relationship to the legal substance that you are allowing to be sold and taxed in your state. And so for you to do anything less than that creates the disenfranchisement of certain people in the process, and it certainly does not lend to a truly equitable, social equitable program that we sold to the people of Illinois.
You know, right. Yeah. Which if we're not talking about like business and licensing, real social equity is
right
fairness before the law, which is not charging someone with not potentially giving someone jail time for something that it just requires a license to do. Because they're not like endangering anyone's safety or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. So just another selfish plug. Some of these peaks you're getting are from that mini documentary you can purchase now at colememo.com/minidoc, or you can catch it at a screening near you. Let's continue on JB's speech, huh? Let's round it out. We're almost done. So.
There's a lot of security that you have to put in place. You've got to make sure you've got the right location. You've got to fill out a whole lot of regulatory forms and then make sure you're following it along the way. And
the way he said that is it was like a good thing. I'm sorry. That was just hilarious.
Well, the way he says it all is like, well, this is just the way it is. It's like, well, no, that's like the way you guys set it up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it almost seemed like he was laughing when he said that, you know? He's like, you have to fill out all these forms and you know, just anyways.
There were some people who just didn't have that expertise on their own, but who nevertheless deserved an opportunity to become small business people. Indeed, you know, if you got a license and you could open your doors, you're probably becoming a millionaire.
And that is the best quote I have to stop it again. I'm sorry but that's the quote of the video. That's where I had to stop. I want to play that part again. You just really hear how he phrases that. It's like, if could, there's some other word, but it's all like maybe. It's no guarantee, which is, again, as Phil, you've pointed out, that's really how they pitched it, a guarantee.
Well, play that quote again.
Yep. Here we go.
There were some people who just didn't have that expertise on their own, but who nevertheless deserved an opportunity to become small business people. Indeed, if you got a license and you could open your doors, you're probably becoming a millionaire. And that's, a big change for people that this program was designed to address. So in just a few short years.
I would also just say, like, I don't know if his perspective is a little skewed because of just how wealthy he is, but a whole lot of small business people out here are not millionaires. So like, this holdover from just seeing people make tons of money during the black market days, it's like, I mean, you had to pitch it like everyone who owned a cannabis dispensary was going to be some kind of millionaire, like they're going to make millions and millions of dollars. It's like, what if they're just pulling in $200,000 a year and they have to pay a couple employees? Like, that's a small cannabis business.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of these social equity licensees here, they have they're going for the same 10 dispensary plus some craft license that,
yeah,
that's beyond small business scale in my mind.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Yeah. That like I said, I think that moment, and it was just an interesting one. Anyways, we'll continue. I think past this, I've not seen anything. So
we made tremendous progress, and we stumbled and made some mistakes along the way, but not intentionally. Just it's hard to get this done in the right way. But and of course, we launched the program. I just want to remind you, there was a medical cannabis program before we had our adult use program and recreational. And some of the negotiation was, hey, we should allow the medical owners to be able to open an adult use recreational dispensary first, because they already have the expertise. They're ready to go. They just need to have more space where they are, or maybe another location, but they had the expertise. The challenge of that was every medical dispensary was owned by a person who wasn't a person of color. And there were no women.
Yeah, so stop it there.
Remember.
So he's kind of contradicting himself a little bit, like I was saying earlier, where he was saying, well, other states clearly didn't get this right, so we wanted to do the social equity here. It's really, they wanted to give those existing operators that first mover advantage. Mm-hmm. And it was too much of a political liability to Democrats in this state to do that, because a lot of their constituency in Illinois, and specifically in Chicago, is Black and brown people who had been excluded from the cannabis industry.
Right.
So it's us. It's our problem.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's also crazy how, when you consider that competing proposals would have made it so it's all right, you dominate. Isn't it weird to think about what it could have looked like if they just continued to own the medical market, but the adult use market just kind of took a while to come online, because it would only be social equity licensees, quote unquote,
Well, yeah, I mean, if they had,
you want to talk about market share.
Well, if they had said only social equity dispensaries can operate for the first 3 or 4 years, you probably would have seen a lot more effort to get those people up and running.
True.
Or a lot more shady kind of buyouts and arrangements that we'd never find out about, because all that information is confidential.
Yeah. Yeah. It all always comes back to that.
Well, you just always need to remember that. It's do we really even know what's going on? Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, straight up. I mean, it came up today in an online debate that we just had, where somebody was saying in Florida that you can only own 5% of a license. And I was yeah, well, they kind of say the same thing in Illinois, but how do you really prove that? And that's the whole thing. So.
Well, like only own like up to a certain percent until you're like named on the license, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that like part of it?
Yeah, something like that. But back to like the point you were making, like even in Illinois, you just can't even see that information. So it's like,
Yeah, you can like try to sleuth it out,
mhm.
But you can't like go to the state and get that information,
Right.
which is bizarre.
Right. Especially bizarre when you consider that like some regulators from Illinois have told me on the show that they rely on people like myself and the public to spot different things, where there could be.
Well, and you have to wonder what access they have to that information.
Right. Yeah.
Or like if they have any motivation to look into any of it. Like,
Right.
why would you have any desire to do that if you're just like trying to be good at your job and like get shit done? You don't want to like make waves and be like, oh, this person secretly owns 20 dispensaries in the state.
Yeah, why would you come out and do that? And then also, when you consider that a lot of the regulators in Illinois have all found really awesome jobs in the industry, like, Jeff Cox, Danielle Perry, unfortunately left. I loved her as a cannabis regulated race. Well, she's not in the cannabis industry. She's like in banking, but Toy Hutchinson, she's at MPP. Like I said, Jeff Cox, he's now at PTS. You remember he was at NMI management for a while, which had like Leonard Mailer and the guy from PTS and stuff on it as a workaround to the Illinois law that doesn't let you do that. But now he's like straight up at PTS as the VP of compliance, former head of IDFPR. We could go on and on, but it's crazy. So I guess to your point, oh, and then we should have also say real quick that one of the most recents that I'm aware of is one of the Cannabis Regulation Oversight Officer, a deputy out of that office, becoming the head of the Cannabis Business Association.
Oh yeah.
So like, you just like keep it in the pocket and then maybe you can get a really awesome job in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the people that are currently there go and do that eventually.
Yeah, and by keep it in the pocket, I meant what you said earlier. Don't make waves, just be like a chill regulator.
Well, I would say Danielle Perry made some waves, and that's why she probably works in banking.
Yeah,
I'm sure she still gets paid very well, but
yeah, but when you question things like license limits or possession limits, yeah, that's like all of a sudden get out of here.
Yeah.
All right, well, here we go.
And so here you're allowing people to go into business first who aren't the target of what I consider to be a very important part of the purpose for legalization. So, but we had to address that. It took us some time to get that right as we were issuing the licenses. But let me tell you where we are today. Well, a study was published, an independent study that the state paid for an independent agency to do, not part of the government, and we needed it, a disparity study, so we knew how far along really are we in this process. And that came out just 2 weeks ago, and I have to tell you, I honestly didn't know how far we had come. I mean, I could guess, but I just didn't know. And so when I saw this pop up in my email inbox that, oh, here's the study, I was honestly trepidatious about clicking on it, because I mean, maybe I'm going to find out we have 5 more years of work to get where we want to be, or we're nowhere close or something. But here are the results. Between January 1, 2020, which is the date we legalized, and January 31 of 2023, so that's 3 years and a month, 59% of adult use dispensary licenses were issued to minority or women-owned businesses.
Pause. What the fuck does that mean?
Right.
You could give out 500,000 licenses and say 99.999% of all the licenses we gave out are to minority or women-owned companies. Who's making the money? Who's operational? Like, if this is the metric we're going off of.
Right.
I think all of this is like nonsense. It should all be like relatively free market for the consumer, but
yeah,
if your metric is we're like diversifying and making right the wrongs of the war on drugs, like all of this money is still going to the people that were owning the medical market originally.
And actually, here's the study that he just referenced to back up exactly what you just said. So these first two numbers here show that I believe if you do the math, yeah, like 88%. So these first two numbers here are all sales for the original licensees. This is all, and this is dispensary sales, by the way. You'll notice
so
that
it's 12. So social equity applicants are getting 12% of the industry right now.
yeah. But here's my thing. I really think that for the longest time it was this number, because I think this is the most recent number. You know how there's been like a little
Probably.
spurt, if you will, of licenses opening up. Like,
But
I feel like,
it's crazy that the second site, like the rec sites that they got to set up, is still getting 50% of the market.
yeah. And let's consider this
Crazy.
11.9%. What are they selling?
Yeah, the other people's stuff.
Yeah, and even the craft cultivated products, they are like, let's say they do have some craft products, which are the new cultivation licenses. For people that don't know, I call them small scale cultivation licenses instead of craft. But anyways, that's the legal term for it. Not a lot of them are actually growing their own cannabis right now. I mean, the number is slowly but surely increasing, but I'm willing to bet
I
it's
mean,
not over two handfuls.
from what I see on Reddit, there's probably like 3 or 4 of them.
I think 3 or 4 are growing their own cannabis. And then you'll see, though, this is where it gets confusing, because some people will say, well, you know, there's this product or that product. And it's like, yeah, look at the label, or just depending on, I don't know if everybody puts it on their label, but a lot of it is repacked cannabis from the original licensees, because a lot of these craft cultivation centers, especially at my last check, which I wrote an article about, they're not really growing cannabis yet. They're more like manufacturing centers and infusion centers that buy product from the original licensees. And that could have changed, but from what I hear, not a lot has changed. So just an important point to use their own data, you know? Yes, this number exists, but what are they selling?
Yeah, it's
And
like he will not be citing that number in the speech.
yeah. And then the other thing you'll notice, again, just I want people to look through this and please fact check me, but I don't think there's any cultivation data in here. And I'm sorry, but the last time we saw some cultivation data was from Grown In. And it suggested that I think 75%, I can find the headline. We'll get the video started and I might flash the headline. 75% came from 6 people. And all I'm saying is 75% of the cannabis in the Illinois cannabis market came from like 6 people. And I'm just saying, I don't think it's much different today. It's probably different, but I don't think it's much different today.
There was another stat from like that headset group that analyzes like BioTrack data or whatever, and they were saying, I think it was like close to 80% of sales were like just 10 brands.
Yeah.
So probably fewer than 10 companies even.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Bachtel just said today on a live stream that Cresco is #1 in Illinois. In terms of market share. I could try to find when he says it, but we'll get the Governor Pritzker clip going again, and if I can find that, I'll play that small clip. So here we go.
And most of those people went into business. I mean, there's some that we had about 100 licenses that hadn't been utilized.
Wait, go back a tiny bit.
Like
he's talking about just a tiny bit, like to before where you started here.
Yeah.
And most of those people.
Was that right where we started? Sorry.
Yeah, go back a tiny bit more. I just want to hear him end that.
Yeah.
Thought. Because maybe I'm going to find out we have, 5 more years of work to get where we want to be, or,
you have at least 5 more years of work.
But
no, keep going.
Results between January 1, 2020, which is the date we legalized, and January 31 of 2023. So that's 3 years and a month. 59% of adult use dispensary licenses were issued to minority or women-owned businesses. And most of those people went into business. I mean, there's some that we had about 100 licenses that hadn't been utilized yet because people couldn't find the capital. Remember, this is all during a period where interest rates are going up and up and up. And if you're starting a business and you need to borrow money, it was a very difficult period for people to do it in. So
there's no way that most of the people that got a license are in business.
Yeah, I don't.
Not yet.
Right. Right. And I think at my last count that I heard that most of the craft cultivators that are due for this next, they're not operational yet, so they're at risk of losing their license. I mean, we even saw somebody with their dispensary license. They had one of the coveted golden tickets and they could barely get their dispensary open in time for the deadline. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, that just seemed like a wild overstatement.
Yeah. Yeah, and just because I have it up, and it is only like 30 seconds, I'm just going to play the quick clip from Charlie Bachtel earlier. This is from today, where I believe he basically says that they've got #1 position in Illinois.
Adjusted gross margin jumped to 52%. SG&A was slashed also by 14%. And there's a $51 million net loss, but thanks to a one-time $61 million tax hit, adjusted EBITDA up 33% to $54 million.
Sorry, a lot of tax stuff or stock stuff.
You pulled in $17 million in cash flow and kept top spot in Illinois. So all in all, it seems like it's just another quarter where you continue to, and it further defines, I guess, what you're building here. But how would you best describe your latest earnings?
I think you did a great job of describing them. But we also held on in.
So I guess it wasn't Charlie that said that.
And I think they're still losing money overall, right?
Yeah, I think the report that I read recently, I think maybe you had sent it to me. I'm not sure, but what is it?
I just know whatever I've heard is that GTI is the only one who's like actually in the black, like profitable cash wise.
That's what I was working up to. Yeah. So
even being #1 in Illinois, screwing all these other people out of their opportunity to make money, you still can't make your company profitable.
Yeah. Which is great, not to go on a tangent, but it's crazy when they really fight for these state-based programs. It's like, but they're fucking you so hard.
Well, and I mean, I remember
even the big people, like even Cresco is kind of getting fucked by this. I know they're making out better than everybody, but still.
I feel like this statistic is right. Like GTI, they are profitable, but I remember at one point reading a thing on Grown In like maybe 2 years ago that was like at one point their Illinois dispensaries were like 20% of their overall profits, like a fifth of their whole profits.
That's pretty crazy.
So yeah, like having this moat and this limited license market here, it definitely benefited them and still benefits them.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they're one of the companies that's all still losing money.
Right. So anyways, it was nice to be able to pull out that disparity study since he referenced it.
Really a tremendous result. More. Minority and women-owned businesses held 63% of craft grower licenses, 61% of infuser licenses, 74% of transporter licenses, and then
they hold them.
Lastly,
I also love that he doesn't mention that, hey, you know who holds 100% of craft grow licenses? Veterans. Because you couldn't get a license if you weren't veteran owned.
Yeah. And I think that's true of the dispensary ones too, or at least one of the first rounds, because everybody that got in.
Yeah, I don't think it was true. I don't think it was true for the subsequent ones,
correct.
But it was
yeah,
they
like adjusted it. Yeah. So anyways, and then this thing about transporter licenses that he just mentioned, it's like, all right, who's fucking actually making money off of that? Like I've heard like there's like maybe 2 active licenses in the state. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but I've heard.
One, who are the 16% that aren't women or minority owned? Were those just non-responses or?
Yeah. Well, what demographic do they fall into?
Because all those white-owned companies were just default had transport. They didn't even apply for these licenses.
Yeah. I don't even think they actually I mean, I don't mean to get and take us on a tangent, but I don't even think they actually have a license. And if they did, it's like that. Yeah, like you said, they kind of like just got grandfathered into it, like some piece of paper, you know. But because it wasn't a concept when they started, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like 84% are minority or women owned, but 100% of the business is not with them.
Yeah, that would be a better way of putting it. Yeah.
Although I think there's a couple of them that have found ways to get business.
The transporters, yeah. No,
Yeah.
for sure. Like I said, I've heard of at least like two, you know. And that whole transport lawsuit a few years ago didn't just come out of nowhere. Like that got brought up because of, you know, people that have acted, you know, they're trying to do it the right way, and they had heard about this activity and they brought it to the media, you know what I mean? So uh I bring that up to say that, you know, they're active, right? And they were like pissed off, and that's why it came up. So keep playing the clip.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Our direct forgivable loans went to minority and women-owned cannabis businesses. So of course, I was very interested. I'm a competitive sort, and I want Illinois to win always. And so I asked that we compare it to all the other states, and they did that in the study for us. So that's great. It turns out Illinois, with all of those licenses and dispensaries and infusers and so on, 60%, you know, minority and women-owned for Illinois. The next state next to us, second, was Maryland at 37%. So we're at 60, they're at 37, and you know, down from there to you know, smaller numbers. Great for them, better for us, you know. But you know, like I said, I'm a competitive sort. Love Maryland and Governor Moore. Love Illinois more. I really am incredibly proud of the progress that we've made. It hasn't been easy. We have more work to do, there's no doubt. I'm not satisfied with where we are. We have a long way to go to repair the damage of the war on drugs that was unleashed on so many communities. And I'm really hopeful that the cannabis industry will continue to bring opportunity and wealth to communities of color for decades to come. That's going to take work, and we all have to be attentive to it. And I believe that we have a General Assembly and an administration that is going to stay on it every day. We have an actual agency that we created that does this every day, focuses on it. And
wait, pause.
You know, our great.
They don't have an agency.
Yeah, they don't. That's kind of weird to hear him say that.
What the fuck was that?
Yeah. Seems like he maybe just showed his cards.
Also, just like, you want to create a cannabis industry that's going to provide income to like communities of color and low income areas, legalize cannabis farmers markets.
Yeah.
Give people like peddlers licenses.
Yeah. I also just think it's like, I get what he means when like it's like the irreparable harms of the war on drugs. But like, I don't know, I keep getting caught up in like why are we acting like we've made the point ad nauseum?
Yeah, like,
you know?
well, yeah, and not only is cannabis still criminalized, all the other drugs are still criminalized.
Right. So
if you're referencing the whole war on drugs, not just the war on cannabis.
Yeah. And you know, I was listening back to a conversation.
You just have to wonder when this like shtick of his kind of gets tired. Like, I feel like it already is. Like, watching the speech, it's like, man, we've been hearing this since 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nobody
calls him out on it.
Look at what we exist. I think it's part of like the hyper partisanship we exist in, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It'd just be crazy to hear him get a question about like if just to put it on his radar. Like, I don't even know how you'd phrase it, but just like, what do you have to say about the continued criminalization of cannabis in Illinois? Just like say it that way, because it's like,
I mean, it's not hard. There's like news stories that exist of people being arrested for having over 100 grams and getting charged with a felony.
Yeah. Yeah.
For a lot of people like myself, you sometimes find yourself in that situation.
Right. Yeah, same. That's
I
like,
don't think of myself as a criminal. I don't think a lot of people like us do.
yeah, we simply, just like when you do anything, like when I go to the store, I buy in bulk because I don't want to like run back and forth to the store, you know? So,
Well, I mean, the apt comparison is like, I buy my weed in Michigan and I illegally get it home, and it's usually in the over that limit. I also buy all the like meat that we eat in Michigan because there's like this farm I like to go to buy like really great meat, and it's like the price that it is in like a grocery store here in Chicago.
yeah.
So it's like I load up on a ton of meat and I bring that back. Like it's no different.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be any different. We're
Yeah.
not banned from buying the meat in Michigan and bringing it back here to Illinois.
Right. Yeah. It's well said. Very well said. Yeah, so I just get caught up in that point when he acts like the war on drugs is not currently ongoing. But like you say, hopefully that shtick will get tired and maybe somebody will ask him about it in the future. I'd love to. Um, let's continue the clip.
On it every day. We have an actual agency that we created that does this every day, focuses on it, and our great leader of that agency is here, and I thank her for the work that she's done. Yeah, a crew has been, just outstanding. So,
CREW is the Cannabis Regulation
Well, I guess he's
Oversight
talking about
Office.
CREW, but that's not an agency.
Yeah, it's not a state agency, and that's what, like, if people are wondering right now what we're talking about, there's been this debate over cannabis agency versus commission, and in the past, the state of Illinois, specifically Danielle Perry, the Cannabis Regulation Oversight Officer, had suggested perhaps we do a commission, because currently, like, the Cannabis Regulation Oversight Office, like, doesn't have any like real regulatory power. They like oversee these different agencies, I guess, but it's a mystery to me what they
But they're
actually
also
do.
legally not allowed to communicate with them.
Yeah, something about that.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I have learned that part of what they're saying is apparently their systems literally just don't even communicate, like, and which, because I've always just wondered, like, oh, we're not allowed to legally communicate. I'm like, what do you mean you can't just send a fucking email or call? But like sometimes they mean literally, like, to, like, I guess from what I've heard, to make certain decisions, like literally this agency can't do some communication with that agency because, like, even if CRO is directing it, like they, like, literally there's a technical barrier where the systems don't talk.
I mean,
it sounds so stupid, right?
Yeah, but the fact that the state uses BioTrack makes me believe that's entirely possible.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So anyways.
They probably license BioTrack to handle their like internal communications too.
Yeah. That's so crazy that in this clip, I'm gonna have to send that to one of my good friends, that he says that there's an agency. Because again, folks, it's not an agency yet. The state is currently pushing for an agency, but from what I understand, I mean, he could create.
Was that even in the most recent legislation?
No, actually,
I don't remember that being.
I don't believe it was. From what I asked about that, I asked somebody
probably because there wasn't any consensus on it.
Right. And also, they just created a new state agency, like the Early Child Development Agency. And from what I understand, it's like this whole idea of bloated government. You don't want to maybe create too many agencies in 1 year. You know what I mean? Even, you get what I'm saying, though?
Yeah, I mean, we probably do have way too much government in Illinois.
We do. That's why I was kind of laughing halfway through my point. But, just the optics of, like, oh, create this and then we'll create that. And it's like, maybe we do one a year. From what I hear, that's like, from what I hear on the inside, if you will. The hesitation to like really push for that is not so much that it's not supported by him. I mean, he's saying it as if it's already the case. Yeah, from what I've heard, it's just hesitance to like do another one, you know,
Mhm.
right now. So anyways, he's talking about Crew and how Aaron Johnson, it looks like, has done an outstanding job. I'll back it up just a bit.
I thank her for the work that she's done. Yeah, Crew has been, I mean, just outstanding. So we are in process. So stay tuned about all the progress that's yet to come. But our success ought to inspire other states, maybe other countries, to pursue their own cannabis equity agenda, perhaps even bringing it to the federal level in the United States. Sometimes, yeah.
Boo, boo.
Now, I want you to know, and I do believe we ought to do this on a federal level, but every day that goes by that hasn't been done on the federal level benefits the taxpayers of the state of Illinois, because as it turns out, and I hear these things, that people from Indiana, people from Iowa, people from Wisconsin, Kentucky, drive across the border and buy something at a
Buy their weed in Michigan.
No, people from Wisconsin, for the most part, are going to Michigan these days.
Yeah, straight up.
For sure.
Yeah,
At least the people like us who buy the majority of the weed. Like, sure, you get a bunch of people from like the border area of Wisconsin who go down to these northern Illinois dispensaries. Those are not people that like smoke every day.
Right. Yeah. One of the best points you made, and
those people would drive to the UP.
Exactly. One of the best points you've made, and like I said, I'll get this going again. It's like the people that are going to Illinois dispensaries are usually people that, like, I don't mean to paint with a broad brush because this isn't true in all cases, but didn't already have a good source figured out or didn't learn about Michigan. You know what I mean? Or they just don't smoke enough. And so Illinois cannabis dispensaries are fine, you know, because it's like, I'm just buying a small amount, you know?
Don't have access to transportation, that kind of thing.
True. Those are the other things. Absolutely. Again, I don't mean to paint with a broad brush. But yeah, here we go.
Something at a dispensary in Illinois. Now, they're not supposed to drive back over the border into their states with it, so I assume they're just staying in Illinois. But you can tell when you look at the sales tax numbers and the cannabis revenue that's coming to the state of Illinois that it's about 20 to 25% of all of the revenue that we get in the state, and that's at the state level and the local level. Comes from people who come from out of state, sort of cannabis tourists, if you will. So I'm pleased about that, but I do believe that equity demands that we go at this at the federal level and do it the way that Illinois has done it. And apparently I'm done. I'm not, yeah.
It's pretty funny.
It's the first time I've been sent off stage like that.
He's very likable sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, he is.
Thank you all really for being here, for the work that you do, for committing yourselves to a modern, innovative, and equitable cannabis industry, and enjoy the rest of the conference today.
Yeah, that guy behind him was definitely security. He walked out after that light thing and was like, what the fuck's going on
What
here?
is going on? Yeah. Yeah. I will say I did not appreciate his joke about people taking it out of state, you know, because that would violate the Cole Memo. Sorry.
Well, it's also like, you know, people do get in trouble for that, and it's not really that funny.
Yeah, it's not funny at all. Yeah. Indiana still has like really bad laws. So does Ohio.
But also, like the state of Illinois, if they hadn't overregulated their cannabis industry, they would probably be selling like over half the weed they sell to out-of-state people. And we would probably be doing like $3 billion a year because we've got more easy access to this state from surrounding states than a place like Michigan. And Michigan sells over $2 billion a year.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, dude, we would own the South. Everybody from the South would come up to Illinois.
I mean, well, and those, if they didn't make it so that like only a certain number of dispensaries can be in these like by population kind of, you would have dozens of shops in like southern, like southwest, southeast Illinois, like New Buffalo is, where they had like 35 dispensaries to apply to open.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what, you know, and the state just isn't, it doesn't see that kind of development of dispensaries in those areas.
Yeah. Well, and
but you would be like, yeah, you would be drawing people in and sending them home. And if the purchase limits like weren't such a thing.
Right. Well, and one of the things we found out, just, I think it's important to bring up, I think we've made it on the podcast like once in the past, but it's an interesting point that we learned because we, constantly kind of rail against license limitations, which is really what I feel the whole Illinois legacy is about. It's cannabis generation
License
2.0.
limitations and overregulation, I think, is the
And
other problem.
overregulation, absolutely, or as they like to say, compliance focused. The talking about license limitations. So we always poke holes in license limitations, and one of the things we learned, again, I know we already made it. Hell, this will be the third time I guess we made it because we made the point earlier in this podcast. But just to kind of dwell on it for a moment, license limitations already play out at the local level, and these state license limitations seem to be like really redundant, because again,
Well,
we
yeah.
saw people with one of these coveted golded licenses and they could barely get it through like a township.
Well, and like only a certain percent of the population smokes weed, but everybody eats food, and only a certain number of restaurants can exist in any town, no matter how big it is.
Yeah.
You're going to find your saturation level eventually.
Right. And that's like, I mean, you get it because we've talked about it before, but just for the folks that are listening, like that's the point I want to make is like, I don't know. I guess I'm not opposed necessarily to license limitations, but at the state level, yeah, it seems redundant. Like maybe at a community level, if you decide you only want this amount of smoke shops in your community or this amount of restaurants, or
Well, yeah, because like we went
that's
to
your
that,
communal
we went
decision.
to that town hall meeting, and they brought up like someone was complaining about the dispensary coming, and they're like, we already have all these smoke shops, and the mayor was like, look, we capped the number of smoke shops.
Yeah.
So local communities can cap these things if they want to. Like the state doesn't need to do it.
Exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make, It's just, yeah. So and I guess what I'm saying too with that, and I think you'd agree with this, and if you don't, it's okay. I'm okay with a local community making that decision and hashing that out at a local level.
Yeah, for sure.
And if they don't want it in their community, like, well, although I might disagree, like if let's say that didn't go through.
But you also have the freedom as like a business owner then at that point to go to the community next door.
That's what I was going
to say. Or to go to one, two over. Like,
right. Yeah. Well said. So, yeah, I think that's could be the way, but we just can't.
We should like, let's get like a contingent of Republican lawmakers, all from the downstate and like border areas of the state, and be like, what about our social equity? We should have 4 times the number of dispensaries that we have down here.
Yeah. I bet the enforcement was, I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't high in Chicago because it still is disproportionate in Chicago, but
I mean, I just don't even know what, like, because you would need you would need an opposing party to advocate for a more free market in Illinois. It's like, what, I don't, the Republicans in Illinois, what do they even do?
Right.
They nominate that one guy, like Darren
Bailey.
Yeah, Darren Bailey. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Like he could actually run against Pritzker on the cannabis issue, but apparently not big enough of an issue.
Right. And if the point hasn't been made enough already, I want to just play this short clip that kind of illustrates Phil, you and I's point, and it also gives me another chance to give a plug for my new mini documentary. Here we go.
The push to legalize marijuana in Illinois gets a huge boost as it's supported by the state's next governor.
After legalization came to be, I started a podcast.
I am Cole Preston.
And I quickly learned
we still have more ways now to get in trouble, criminal trouble for cannabis than we did before 2020.
I will be releasing a retrospective mini documentary that details how Illinois fell short of achieving meaningful reform in its cannabis policy.
This plan would make marijuana legal, but would not remove all of the consequences. Explain that for us.
Why are they busting in my door after midnight over something that Illinois says is legal?
Right. Things are legalized, but it's not legalized completely.
Screening day. So yeah, you can find that at colememo.com/minidoc. And the whole thing is like that. There's, footage that makes those points. So if you don't want to hear me make those points, plenty of other people have, because the criminalization of cannabis continues and everything's fucked up. So
hey, it's slowly getting better.
Right. And we are stepping in the right direction. As we started the podcast off, I think that's a good way to end the podcast as well. I'm happy. And even Carol Ammons, who we've referenced a few times throughout the show, she said in her, I want to say famous speech. I hope it becomes a famous speech. It's the speech that I include in my mini documentary.
It's famous to us.
It is world famous for me. She is happy and I'm happy with the progress we've made, but I don't believe we've done enough to guarantee justice and equity in cannabis. And I think that is well put. We've not done enough. It's a good start, but to pretend it's done. And one point we didn't make, sorry, Phil, but the governor made the point, like, legislators are working every day on this cannabis issue. Okay, I said in 2000.
No, they passed like one additional round of legislation, right?
Right. Something, I think LaShawn Ford got something through with like maybe a lottery. Carol Ammons got her expungement thing through that we were talking about. And then the only other thing I am aware of is when you could argue the larger companies, or let's just say the cannabis companies, got their 280E thing through and then stole the money out of the medical cannabis fund.
Yeah, there's been like maybe 3 rounds of additional legislation, not any of them really like changing all that much.
Yeah, and the main point that was made when we made this law was that there will always be like trailers and fixes, and it just doesn't seem like, even by the people that were sponsors and really highly involved in it all, that are still in the legislature, are really like, yeah, it's just like anything else. It just doesn't seem like there's a lot of energy behind legalization because it's done already, right? There's the kinks you got to work out, but for the most part, it's done. What's the big problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's why, hey, whenever I find some story about someone being charged with some cannabis felony in Illinois, I post it on Reddit. Just be like, hey, while you're looking at these cannabis reviews, just remember, people still going to jail.
Yeah, be careful out there.
Or at least getting stuck in the criminal justice system to some regard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Phil, it was a pleasure to do this with you. I always enjoy chatting with you, especially when we've got some solid new Illinois cannabis content to break down.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So thanks for sitting down with me and smoking.
Yeah, it was fun.
And all that. So
I worked my way through a whole 2-gram joint.
Yeah, dude, I saw you were puffing on that thing a second ago. So looked boss.
Well, I told you it's the oldest stuff I have. I got to get through it.
Fuck yeah. Cool, man. Well, folks, I hope you found value in this conversation. We'll see you in the next episode of the Cole Memo. Take care.